Hello, everybody, and welcome to the My Endurance Hub weekly question and answer period where we take your questions and hopefully give you some good answers. Anything goes as long as it fits into the endurance sport space or, loosely around it. I'm really excited about this part of the My Endurance Hub platform because I think it gives people an opportunity to have FaceTime with a coach. My name's Jasper Blake. I'm one of the founders of the My Endurance space, as well as the head coach. I've been actively involved in sport my entire life for as long as I can remember. I spent 20 years as a professional triathlete and Ironman athlete. And now I've been running my coaching business for about the last 15 years. And I'm really excited because I love sharing all the stuff that I've learned over the years. And so now's your chance to ask whatever you want to ask, and hopefully I'll have some good answers for you. Just a reminder that questions, if you can write them in the chat, and I'll get to them. Hopefully I can get to everybody's questions. But definitely write them in the chat, and that's where I'll see them. There's also the raise your hand function. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand there. This live stream's being recorded. So if there's something you want to go back and review, you can find it in the My Endurance Hub space in the previously recorded question and answer section. And again, if your question doesn't get answered, please add it in the community in the general discussion. That would be great because we can address it there. With lots of people, if they're tuning in, we may not get to everybody, but we sure do want to help and answer your questions in the My Endurance space. Let's get cracking. I think we have some questions already, which is great. Looks like we've got a question from Mike. And not sure where Mike's from. Mike, where are you tuning in from? Might be a bit of a delay. That's okay. We'll figure out where Mike's from in a second. But he's got a great question. His question is, can you talk about transitions? I'm really confused about how I get out of the water and onto my bike, and then how to quickly move from my bike into my running shoes. And do I wear socks? I love this question. Oh, it looks like Mike's from Kelowna, BC. That's awesome, up here in Canada. Great spot. I was actually born in Kelowna, if you can believe it. I guess that's not that exciting. Everybody's born somewhere. Let's jump right to it there. And we've got, welcome, Jason. Jason's in here as well. And we'll get to your question in a sec, Jason. Let's deal with Mike's first. So transition, if you are getting into triathlon, obviously it's one of the main components in what makes triathlon such a unique sport. It's not one sport, it's three different sports, and we have to move from one sport to the next, and we call those transitions. When we move from the swim to the bike, we typically call that the first transition, or T1. And then when we move from bike to run, we call that the second transition, or T2. And Mike's question, he's confused about how I get out of the water and onto my bike and then quickly move from bike into my running shoes. So let's address the first one. Well, first and foremost, it depends whether you have a wetsuit or a non-wetsuit swim. If the conditions are such that it's cold enough and you're wearing a wetsuit, the first thing you're going to need to do is take that wetsuit off. And what I recommend is that when you get out of the water, so those first few steps coming onto the beach, you reach behind and you pull the zipper of your wetsuit. Now, hopefully this is all stuff you're going to practice before, right, Mike? You're not just going to do this for the first time on race day. So you're going to reach behind, you're going to pull that zipper, and while you're running to the transition, so while you're running from the beach up to your bike, which is in transition, you're going to get that top part of your wetsuit down. Now, most races in Canada, if Mike, you're in Kelowna, most of the races are going to be wetsuit legal. So you probably will have a wetsuit on. If the water temperatures are warm enough that you do not need a wetsuit, then you can disregard this part, and it's actually easier because you're just going to run to your bike. So you're going to need to get that top part of your wetsuit down to your waist. Okay. I recommend that people keep their goggles and their cap on until they get to their bike. And the reason for that, is you don't want to drop them along the way and then you got to go back and pick them up. If you just leave them on your head, they're going to stay there. You get to your bike. And then when you get to your bike, you need to get the bottom part of your wetsuit off. And again, I hope this is something that you're going to practice before race day, so it's not the first time you're doing it. You're going to need to get that wetsuit off of your legs, and then you're going to take swim cap and goggles off. If you forget to take swim cap and goggles off, you'll know very quickly, because when you try and get your helmet onto your head, it's not going to feel right. So that'll be your first clue. Anyway, we get the swim cap, goggles off. You're going to need to put them kind of in a neat pile right by your transition. Sometimes they have bins that you need to put those in. If you're doing an Ironman event or an Ironman 70.3 event, they'll usually have bags that stuff will need to go in, and you can't sort of just leave your stuff willy-nilly around. You have to keep it contained. So now we have wetsuit off. Okay. Next step, I always recommend getting that helmet on first. You cannot touch your bike if your helmet is not on and buckled. So a lot of times people will get a penalty for that specifically. They're very, very strict on it. It's a safety thing. They don't want people running out of there, first of all, with no helmet, but secondly, if it's not buckled up. So once you have your swim stuff off, your wetsuit and your goggles and your cap, you get that helmet on, you buckle it up. That's step one. Always step one before you touch your bike. You're not allowed to be handling your bike unless that helmet is on and buckled. Super, super important. And then you want to put your bike shoes on. So if you're, using bike shoes with clip-in pedals, which most people will do, you want to get those on. Sometimes you'll be required to wear a number belt, so you'll also have that in transition. So there's a few things you need to do. And I really recommend that people practice this before, or they mentally rehearse it. So you kind of go through the little checklist of things that you need to do. One little tip is to put that number belt, if you do need to clip that on, like right in your helmet, so you don't forget it. So, you can't put your helmet on until that's on. And once those bike shoes are on, once your helmet's on and buckled, and once that number belt's on, then you can take your bike and you can start making your way from where your bike is racked out of transition. Now, this is a really important part. You cannot get on your bike until you get to the mount line. This is something that you should look at before. So the day before the race, you actually want to do a walkthrough of the transition. You want to kind of get a feel for it. You want to walk from the swim to where your bike is, and then where you're going to exit with your bike, and where's the mount line. So this is the line, and they'll actually draw a line in the road, like on the road, indicating where you are allowed to get onto your bike. And just like the helmet rule, if you get on your bike early, you will get a penalty. And if you do it and maybe don't listen to them, or you argue with them, you just get disqualified. So you have to be really careful with that stuff. So you want to get past the mount line, then you get on your bike, and then you're riding. So that's kind of the first transition. The second transition, you're going to be coming in from the bike. And again, this is something that you should check out the day before, is where is the dismount line. So this is the line where you have to be off your bike before going across this line. And again, they're very, very strict. It's a safety thing. They don't want people riding their bikes into transition. If you're too aggressive with it, they'll just throw you out of the race. Most of the time, if you break that rule, they're going to give you a penalty. It's a time penalty. So you're coming in, you're going to get off your bike before you get to that dismount line. Then you're going to run your bike to your bike rack. Again, hopefully you've done this the day before, just to see the flow. You're going to rack your bike, and only once you have let go of your bike, it's back in the rack, are you allowed to then unbuckle your helmet, put your helmet on the ground. You're going to take those bike shoes off, and then you're going to put those running shoes on. Now, to address the second part of your question, do I wear socks? Well, that's a really good question. And when I raced, it depended on the length of the race. So it was a very short, fast race. I never wore socks. Every second counted. And if I got some blisters because I wasn't wearing socks, it was worth it. If it meant higher placing, I was willing to do that. But as soon as I got above certainly a half Ironman into Ironman events, I always did put on socks. and I would use double layered socks, and that was to avoid blisters. When you get into the long stuff, you have to do everything you possibly can to make yourself as comfortable as possible. And socks will often stave off blisters. You don't want blisters. If it's short race, you can deal with it. You can suck it up. But if it's a long race, that can really hamper your pace, and it can really hamper how the race goes overall. And in a long event, it takes you 15, 20 seconds max to put on a pair of socks, and it might save you half an hour if you don't get blisters. So time-wise, it's worth it. Mike, I hope that answered your question about transition. If you have any follow-up questions, definitely throw them in the My Endurance Hub chat space, and we'll address them there. Jason, another guest. Thanks for joining us, Jason. Jason's question is, I am just starting out. What is a good amount to invest in a bike if I plan on doing a triathlon in a year or so? Oh gosh, Jason, this question has many answers. The first is budget. I think people always need to consider their budget. Some people have an unlimited budget, and then I just say, go for it. If this is your hobby, then go to the bike shop and get whatever you want. But most people are on a budget. If you want to do a triathlon in a year, I would say look at what bike you have in this moment. So most people start with a road bike, and a road bike is one that has, traditional handlebar setup. So we call those drop bars. So the bar kind of goes across, and then it does this funny loop around thing. If you have a bike that looks like that, that's a standard road bike. And I would say for the first 6 months before your triathlon, you can get away with that. You can put really great miles in on a road bike. If you're riding with a group of people, so maybe you're riding with a bike club, they will prefer you to be on a bike like that rather than a hardcore triathlon bike with the fancy bar setup and the aero bars. If you ride with a group, you don't ever want to be in those aero bars because they'll throw you out of the group, especially if it's road bikers. They don't love that, and it's a safety thing. Your hands are not covering the brakes when you're in like a traditional triathlon position. But as you get closer to the race, I would then say there's a couple answers. The first is, are you doing a short sprint type triathlon? It's your first one. You're going to be one and done. You just want to check it off the list. Then I would just say stick with the road bike that you have. I don't think you need anything kind of fancier or upgraded. If you're just going to do one and it's just for fun for you, there's more versatility with the road bike, meaning you can go with groups, you can go on varied terrain, and it's much more comfortable. And certainly to do a one and done short distance triathlon, a road bike is going to be fine. If you're hardcore and you're like, no, I want to get stuck into this sport, and maybe after my first one, I want to do some more, or maybe I want to eventually do a half Ironman or a full Ironman, then I would recommend definitely investing in a triathlon bike. They are faster. They put you in a more favorable body position, so aerodynamically, but also the angles of your hips are in favor of opening the hip angle. So when you're in that aero position, it's just a little easier to pedal. It's a little easier for your body to manage. So this is a roundabout way to say, what is a good amount to invest in a bike? What I can tell you, Jason, is bikes range everywhere from about $2,000 to $20,000. At the high end these days, the top time trial bikes, probably 15 to 20,000 bucks. They're not cheap. But if you plan on doing this for 5 or 6 years, I don't think you need a $15,000 or $20,000 bike unless you're a pro. But you can get a really decent one for probably 5 to 10,000. That'll set you up really, really well. And then, the $2,000 to $5,000 range, really what you're getting is a bike that's a little bit heavier. The components maybe aren't, as top of the line, but you can still get something pretty decent down there. So really depends on budget, really depends on how long you plan on sticking it out, depends on the length of the race. Not one simple answer. Sorry, I bet you wish I'd just say, Jason, go out and get a $15,000 bike and don't care what anybody thinks. That's what most people want to do. Okay. Oh, this is great. We got some other people in here. Aiden. Aiden, thanks for jumping in here with us. Aiden's question: I'm doing a sprint triathlon and will be in a pool for the swim. How will they start the race? Should I wear a wetsuit? Okay, this is a great question. So chances are, if it's in a swimming pool, you will not be allowed to wear a wetsuit. Wetsuit legal swims are determined by water temperature. And typically a pool, unless it's a very cold pool, will be warm enough that wetsuits are not allowed. So if it's a pool swim, my guess is that you just won't be allowed to wear one anyway, which makes it much more simple. In the event that you are allowed to wear a wetsuit in a pool swim, which would be rare, but if you are allowed, then, for most people, even if it's a sprint triathlon, I would recommend it. Wetsuits are a lot faster. I used to be probably 7 seconds per 100 faster in a wetsuit. So let's do quick math. A sprint triathlon is about 750 meters. So 7 times 7, 49. I'm gaining about a minute in my sprint triathlon time with a wetsuit, and it probably takes me about 20 or 30 seconds to take it off. So from my perspective, if I was allowed to wear a wetsuit in a pool swim, I would probably do it because I'd be faster at the end of the day. But as I said, chances are low that in a pool swim you can. Oh, and how will they start the race in a pool swim? That's another great question. Usually in a pool swim, they stagger start. So they'll start the fastest swimmers first. And quite often they'll have the entire pool booked. And let's say there's 8 lanes. You'll swim, you'll start in lane 1. You'll swim up this side of lane 1 and back down this side. And then you'll go under the lane rope and you'll go up this side of lane 2 and back down this side. And you'll just keep doing that. And then sometimes you have to actually get out of the pool and walk back to lane 1. So that's one version of how they'll do it. The other version is they'll do wave starts. So they might have 3 or 4 people in a lane per lane, and they'll send people off. They'll finish their 750 meter pool, 750 meter swim, and then they'll put a new wave of people in. It's a little logistically tough in the pool because you have limited space and a huge variation in pace. It all depends on the race. Okay, on to Kevin. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Kevin also made a comment that $15,000, oh my, for bikes. Yeah, that's they're jaw-dropping. I mean, they're the same price as a fairly inexpensive car. So again, really depends on budget. But look, to be clear, you do not need a $15,000 bike to have tons of fun and tons of success in the triathlon space. My goal there was just to give you a range, and that's definitely at the upper range. Okay. Kevin asked, can you talk a little bit about nutrition / eating the day of the race and during the race? Do you recommend gels to eat during the race? This question we get all the time. Race morning, again, multiple answers here. Race morning, you want to have a meal that's sort of 2 or 3 hours prior to the start. It should be carbohydrate focused with a little bit of protein and a little bit of fat so you feel satiated. What I always tell people is you want to arrive at the start not feeling hungry, but not feeling full. You just want to feel like, okay, I'm ready to go. I've had a bit of fuel this morning and I'm ready to go. My go-to was one of 2 things. Oatmeal with some banana and maybe some hemp nuts. So I'm covering those 3 bases that I talked about, mostly carbohydrate through the oatmeal and the banana. Hemp nuts gave me a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat. Or a bagel with some kind of nut butter. I was fine with peanut butter, so I would just do peanut butter and banana. So that's mostly carbohydrate, and then the nut butter provides me with a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat. 2 to 3 hours before, and then I would always sip kind of a sport drink, electrolyte drink right up until the race, and that usually was good for me. Some people, half an hour before the race, will have a gel with some water just to make sure their carbohydrate stores are totally stocked up. And the second part of that question, do you recommend gels to eat during the race? Well, yes, it depends on the length of the race. So understanding real basic physiology and the effort that most races take, we have anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes of stored muscle glycogen. So this is stored carbohydrate that we can use. So if your race is only an hour, you shouldn't really need to take anything in. If your race is 90 minutes, now we're getting to the point where maybe, yeah, you need to take something in. Certainly above 90 minutes, then you should have a nutrition plan. If we're talking half Ironman or Ironman, the nutrition plan is a massive part of that equation. And you really need to have that dialed in and practiced before the race actually starts. It's a little vague to say, should I just take gels during the race? Well, what you should focus on is the amount of carbohydrate that you're going to need to replace. And that's different for different races. As intensity goes up, so if the race is like Olympic distance, it's going to take 2 or 3 hours. Intensity is fairly high. Then you need to be mindful of having probably, the equivalent of a gel or two per hour. Plus water and sodium. Most of our nutrition needs can actually be met through a sport drink. That'll cover carbohydrate, water, and sodium. I won't dive too much into that because the answer is quite long, other than to say, Kevin, depending on the length of the race, if it's more than 60 minutes, consider it for sure. More than 90 minutes, definitely for sure. Longer than 2 hours, absolutely nutrition needs to be a massive part of your plan. Jason's comment, thanks. I will make sure I can finish this race before I make a big investment. Good. Yeah. Back to Jason's question about the cost of a bike. Stick with what you got early on. Try it. If you love the sport and you want to start doing longer stuff, then consider a higher purchase. What was my best time doing a triathlon? Well, there's multiple distances. My best time for an Olympic distance was 1:48. That was in a draft legal race, so the bike's a little faster. My best time for a half Ironman was 3:52, and my best Ironman time was 8:33. Aiden. So Aiden asked a question before about wetsuits in the pool. What do you recommend for recovery? Food, stretch, rest, light activity? The answer is yes, all of the above. First and foremost, recovery, like it's hardwired into us that we need good sleep. So if you're struggling to recover, check in first with whether you're sleeping enough. But food is really important. So we have a window of about 30 to 60 minutes post workout or post race where we can get in. I always like to say get in like meal replacement. I mean, the first thing you need to replace is water and carbohydrate after a workout or a race. But then you also need some good fats, good proteins, like a healthy meal post-race. Most of the time post-race, people will just get a burger and fries, myself included, because you feel so spent, which is fine. I mean, I always used to have a recovery shake or a recovery drink that was carbohydrate focused, a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein, lots of water. I would start with that. And then as a treat, I would usually, like most people, get a burger and fries. Light activity, we call that active recovery, is amazing for recovery. It's better than just sitting around doing nothing. Stretching, people are hit and miss with stretching. I'm not going to recommend it as a definite thing, but I'm not going to not recommend it. I had muscle groups that I could stretch and it was favorable and it felt good. And I had muscle groups that if I stretched, I actually did more damage to them. I think I just overdid it. I stretched too hard, which was my own fault, but I think lots of people do that. Jason asked, I've heard mixed reviews about carb loading before a race. What are your thoughts on this? Well, look, we have, as I said, we can store about 60 to 90 minutes of muscle glycogen in our bodies. So it's not like you can suddenly store 4 hours worth of muscle glycogen. So, carbo loading, they did lots of studies in the past and found that, look, the goal is to really make sure that your muscle glycogen stores are topped up before a race. And so carbo loading was the way to do that. I think most people take it too far. You have to be, of course, mindful of consuming carbohydrate pre-race, but most of us consume enough carbohydrate anyway. I would focus on good balanced meals, but certainly avoid any of these diet things where it's like, you know, I got an Ironman coming up and I'm only going to eat lean chicken breast for a week is a bad idea, I think. That's a whole other conversation about, you know, metabolizing fat as fuel, but our limiter is always the amount of carbohydrate we have in our system. And if we run out of that, it doesn't feel good. It's what we call bonking. And it's an awful feeling. It's the feeling you get when you suddenly are so hungry, you go to the corner store and buy 3 bags of chips and huge gummy bag, and you eat everything all at once because you're just like, frantic. What? Okay, Aiden. Another great question here. I'm surprised the Gatorade type drinks are actually good, but sounds like they have the right mix of ingredients. What about coffee or caffeine use? Oh my gosh, another rabbit hole we can jump down. Yes, well, Gatorade, its origin story, I believe, is that the University of Florida Gators football team, very hot climate down there, was really struggling in hot conditions. And so their science department or some department, they said, you got to find us a drink or a way to replace what we're losing. And they realized that they're losing water and carbohydrate and sodium. And so they created a drink with water and carbohydrate and sodium. So yeah, Gatorade has everything you need. Where people run into trouble with sometimes products, I don't want to name Gatorade specifically, like Gatorade actually has a science institute, which is amazing. They do tons of testing. They're really on the leading edge of a lot of stuff, and they have products that are more specific for endurance sports. But sometimes what happens is they use, you know, maybe the sugars aren't great, or and again, I'm not calling out Gatorade specifically, but some of the drinks you might find, let's say in a gas station with food coloring and stuff to make it look good, is targeting a different audience than an endurance athlete. But those drinks have carbohydrate and they have sodium, and they have water, and that's what you need. What happens is sometimes those drinks are very concentrated. So we call it osmolality, which is like the concentration of all that stuff in the liquid. And if it's too high, it's really hard for our guts to manage and absorb, especially when we're at effort. And that's why there's been so much expansion in the sport nutrition space, is figuring out, you know, the concentration of things and maybe using a different blend of carbohydrates that makes it easier to absorb. Lots of different ways that companies are coming at it. But yes, back to your question or your comment, Gatorade origin story is great, and it has everything you need. And you just have to be careful with the concentration of that, and the sugars they use sometimes it doesn't really agree with people all the time, but for some people it's great. Caffeine or coffee, yes, there's absolutely no question at all. The science is pretty clear. Caffeine is a performance enhancement thing. I mean, you know, it's banned beyond certain amounts for good reason. It'd make it crazy if you took the amount that would be banned. But it is a stimulant. So it makes us feel mentally more clear. But the other thing it does is it helps us metabolize fatty acids, and that's huge for longer distance sports. So our ability to pull energy from fat, like use fat as a fuel, is helped by caffeine. So I recommend for sure. I mean, you know, most people are taking in caffeine in some form, and usually it's coffee. But it's definitely an enhancement tool that, you know, is not a bad thing to use. You just have to be careful with how much, and you have to know what it does to your system. You know, some people, you know, they have to go to the bathroom fairly soon after having coffee. Like, it kind of gets your system going. So you don't want to, you know, you need to know the timing of these things pre-race, I would say. Jason said 352 for a half Ironman. I was hoping to do it in under 8 hours. Jason, you know what? Like, this is the beauty of this sport. There's like such a broad range of levels, and what I love is everybody's just trying to survive. Even the person doing 352 is at some level trying to survive. So you go for it, man. You get out there, do it under 8 hours, and that's a big win. Is there a pro circuit? Jason asks, is there a pro circuit for triathletes? Which one do you think of the best and most competitive to watch? Triathlon really has two divisions. We have Ironman, which is a private brand, big brand, biggest brand in the sport for sure. And we have Ironman kind of stream, and then we have the ITU, which is the International Triathlon Union, and this union kind of governs all the national governing bodies, and it's what the Olympics kind of falls in that umbrella. So we have two streams that people generally go, and of course athletes bounce back and forth. Usually they'll start in short course as juniors, and they'll try and make the Olympics, and then as they get a bit older, maybe they'll lean a bit more to the Ironman space. They're both very competitive. You almost get two different athletes. There's lots of crossover, and of course, the short course athletes, when they move to long course, usually do quite well, but you kind of get specialists in both. And they're both exciting for different reasons. They're two totally different types of racing, and I think they're both awesome. Let me just keep moving here to Aiden. Aiden asks, what do you think is the difference between a pro and an amateur? Like, how come some athletes can win and compete while others struggle to even complete a triathlon? The biggest difference is, well, there's a few different differences. I mean, these days, a pro triathlete at the high end is starting, like as a kid, they're starting in a triathlon program. When I came through the system back in the, kind of early 90s, mid 90s, 2000s, triathlon was still very new, and we all came from somewhere else. So we were either runners or bikers or swimmers. And it was really interesting time because people really had strengths and really had weaknesses. Now, if you want to make the Olympic Games, it's pretty rare that you're coming from anywhere else. You're starting as a 5-year-old kid in a triathlon program for the most part. Maybe that's a bit exaggerated. But by the time you get to your late teens, you're very competent in all three sports. So that's one difference. Like, people just start younger now. The sport's evolving. It's great. It's really moving along. The other big difference is time commitment. When I was racing as a pro, that's all I did. I trained 30 to 40 hours a week. And that was it. I would wake up and I would do a workout, and then I would rest, and then I would do another workout and I would rest. I was 2 or 3 workouts a day, 30 to 40 hours a week. And when you start putting in that kind of time, you'll have success. It's like what you put in, you get out. There's a genetic component. There's the neat thing about triathlon is you do get all kind of shapes and sizes. But some people are more predisposed, I think, to endurance sports. And so there's also that, it's like, what's the difference between someone who goes to the Olympics for shot put and the rest of the world? Well, they focus on shot put. They may have the body sort of genetics to get that kind of strength. So that's one type of athlete. And then some people, like the people who struggle to complete a triathlon, well, those are probably people that are getting into it late in life. Maybe they don't have a real endurance sports background, and they just want to take on this challenge and give it a try. And so it's tough. And so that's the biggest difference. Mike from Kelowna. That's where I was born. Did I mention that? What age are most triathletes? Do you still compete? Well, huge age range. That depends on the sport. Everything from young kids now do triathlon events that are short and designed for kids. And gosh, at Ironman or the ITU World Championship age group thing, you get athletes in their 70s and 80s. It's remarkable. It covers the whole spectrum. It's like any other sport. You have tennis players who are 5-year-old kids, and you have tennis players who are 80-year-old recreational. It's the whole spectrum. I personally don't still compete in triathlon. I retired over 10 years ago, and now I'm trying to make the NHL for hockey. And I'm going to be 50 this year, so it's not looking good. But I'm still trying. Every week I get out there, I put on my laces. I hope the scouts are there. Just kidding. Kevin asks, hey, Jasper, this is great. Thanks for all this great info. Do you mind answering my question about your favorite triathlete? Did you ask that before and I missed it? Maybe, Kevin. I don't know. I have to go back through the... Oh, you did. Sorry, Kevin. Who's my favorite triathlete? Gosh, right now, I never really get stuck on any one person. We've had some amazing Canadian triathletes over the years. Simon Whitfield comes to mind, first ever gold medalist at the Olympics, pretty amazing athlete in his time. Peter Reid was an incredible Canadian athlete. So, going back there, I certainly favor the Canadians. We had Laurie Bowden, won 2 or 3 Ironman world titles. She was amazing. Right now, I would say the Norwegians are pretty fascinating. There's these 2 Norwegian guys. I'm going to call them kids. They're not kids, but they're not old, and they're winning everything. Christian Blumenfeld won the last Olympic Games, and then he turns around and he's Ironman world champion, the one they held in St. George, and then his teammate won the Ironman World Championships in Hawaii. I mean, they're just dominating all distances everywhere, all around. And they're pretty fascinating. They're fun to watch. They race with guts, and they're amazing. So they're kind of fun right now. So on the men's side, I would say, those are my favorite athletes for sure. On the women's side, and over the years, I really like this athlete from Australia called Emma Snowsill. I thought she was quite remarkable. I loved the way, she was such a gutsy runner. That was pretty awesome. We had some amazing Canadians. I mentioned Laurie Bowden. Lisa Bentley was another woman who never actually won in Hawaii, but gosh, she was always there, and she was so gutsy. She just, when she was running, you'd just be like, oh my gosh, how's this person keeping going? It's pretty awesome. One of my favorite triathlon moments in the last few years on the women's side was Flora Duffy from Bermuda. We do a camp every year in Bermuda, and Bermuda is tiny. They've never had an Olympic gold medalist. She was their first. Her mom comes to our training camp every year, and gosh, that was just so amazing. She just ran away with it at the last Olympics. And I mean, that country's tiny. There's like 60,000 people in the whole country. And boy, oh boy, I just can imagine what it was like watching her do that. I think it was pretty nuts. So I don't have one favorite. I got lots of favorite stories. I love sporting moments. I love when people do big things in the moment. Aiden says, wow, I didn't really realize people started that young. Yeah, they do now. I mean, a lot of times people, yeah, of course, they do swim, bike, or run in various capacities. You don't have to start at 5. That was a bit exaggerated. But my point was, there's triathlon programs that start very young. There's kids programs that start very young, which is different than when I grew up. Mike says, what are some of the common injuries from triathlon, and what can I do to prevent them? I'm experiencing some low back pain, mostly from running, I think. So yeah, that's a tricky one. Each sport, triathlon's unique in that it's 3 sports, and then it's also challenging in that you're working your body in different ways. But I would argue it's actually a benefit, because you're not stressing your body in any one given way. Like if you're just a runner, it's always running, and that wear and tear can really play on you. But certainly in the water, there's rotator cuff stuff through your shoulder. So your rotator cuff is, this area here, lots of repetitive stuff from that. Running, gosh, there's an interesting stat that I saw once. I don't know if it's true, but I wouldn't doubt it. And it is that 100% of runners get injured. So running's very hard on the body. It can come at you through the knees, through the hips, through the back, through the ankles. It's hard on your body. Biking has its own repetitive strain stuff. So if your position's not great, you're hunched over, sure, you can have back problems. You're also, your hip flexors are in a bit of a compromised position by being bent over all the time. So you can run into problems there that sometimes present in the back. So if you're having low back pain, you might want to actually just check if that's actually a hip flexor issue. Your hip flexor attaches in your back, and sometimes what feels like back pain is actually hip flexor. But I'm not a doctor or physio. You should get that checked out. You said mostly from running anyway. So Yeah, I mean, that you got to go and, check with somebody who's an expert medically, physio, chiro, doctor, to see what's going on there, because it could be any number of things. And I don't want to guess, send you down the wrong path. Kevin says, yes, all good. Simon was pretty awesome. Yeah, gosh, that guy was a heck of a competitor. He was, and he won more than just Olympics. Like, it was, he had a string of World Cups that were amazing, and really amazing competitor, and pretty gutsy. Jason asks, I love these questions. What has been your favorite city to compete in, and why? Well, I did the Escape from Alcatraz race a few times. That was pretty wicked. San Francisco is amazing. They literally take you out in a boat and you jump off right beside Alcatraz Island into that water and swim to shore. And that was nuts and awesome. Ironman Canada was a real staple in my year, and I loved Penticton, small little city. If you're from the States watching this, you should come and do Ironman Canada in Penticton. It's Penticton and the Okanagan's like our version of California. It's like fruit orchards and vineyards and hot weather and beautiful lakes. And I always love going there. Where else? I went to this crazy race in Japan, and we landed in Nagoya. I think it was Nagoya, Japan, or one of the big cities. That was pretty wild because I never really been in a city that big before. Yeah, so many great places to compete. So many great memories. It was awesome. Yeah, that's the neat part of the sport. And actually, tying that in, one of the things that people do with the sport, if they're recreational, that like the people who aren't trying to compete as a pro, is they use these events as a way, kind of like travel tourism or sport tourism, they call it. So, instead of just going on a vacation and lying on the beach, they'll tie it in with, a half Ironman event, bring their family, everybody cheers, and then you chill out for a week after. And there's so many events all around the world. You can kind of go anywhere, and it's awesome. So, Jason asks, thanks for all these questions. This is amazing, you guys. What was your biggest race? How many athletes? Well, that's a great question. Probably biggest in terms of numbers. So when I was first getting going, I competed as an age group athlete, and every year we would do the age group world championships, and the pros were there as well. I was like just young, getting started. And sometimes those races, if I remember right, had, I want to say 5,000 to 7,000 people. Now, somebody might call me out on that, say that's an exaggeration, but I think it was really that huge because you had every country and you had all these age groups from age 20 all the way up to 85. And in each age group, each country's bringing 4 or 5 people, and everybody would just descend on one place at one time. Maybe 5,000-6,000 people's exaggerated, but there was a lot, in the thousands. Ironman events typically had 2,000 or 3,000 people. That was super cool, because we used to have these mass starts. They do it differently now for safety reasons, probably better. But back then we'd all start together. So you had like 3,000 people lined up on a beach, and away you go. So, few pretty big ones. Mike asked, what do you think about Hoka running shoes? I think running shoes are very personal. Hoka's done an amazing job innovating. They're a strong company now. They have a great shoe lineup. But what I recommend is that you go to a little local retailer, people who know what they're doing in the shoe space, and you just ask them, like, they'll look at, if they're a good little store, they'll look at your running gait, they'll look at your feet, and they'll recommend the right shoe for you. And it might be a Hoka, and it might be something else. So I wouldn't get stuck on any one brand. I would go to a good retailer and let them help you make that decision. Because not all shoes, they generally create them within like a few little boxes of, like, cushioning and, heel to toe offset and posting, all these things. And what works for you may not work for somebody else. Jason said he likes Brooks. Great. What's neat about that is Jason's obviously found a shoe brand that he likes that agrees with his feet. And so you should stick with those, but you should always go in and check out because they kind of change. They change them up, each year. A lot of times it's just cosmetic so they can sell more. But sometimes they're changing the technology or the cushioning or the posting, and you should really make sure you're in the right shoe every time. Aiden asked, are there any places where I can learn more about triathlons, podcast, newsletters, etc.? Well, as a matter of fact, Aiden, yes, there is. It's called My Endurance Hub. That's where you are right now. And gosh, we're going to have so much awesome content in there. We will have a weekly podcast where we dive a little deeper with athletes and coaches and hope to, learn more stuff or troubleshoot some issues that people have. So that's a really great place to start. But yeah, there's tons of amazing info out there. There's lots of great coaches. It doesn't take much more than a good Google search to find lots of great information as well. But again, we hope to have tons of that stuff for you at the My Endurance Hub space. What is my brand? Well, for shoes, what is my brand of shoes? Well, I was a long-time Adidas sponsored athlete. I loved their brand. I was with them for 11 or 12 years. They were amazing. I mean, they had such a broad range of product in the shoe department that it was easy for me to find the one that I liked. Usually when I found the one I'd like, I would order like 10 pairs. So just in case they changed it, then I wasn't out of luck. So yeah, I love Adidas right now. I actually run in Saucony. I find I really like that shoe because they have quite a wide toe box. I have kind of a wide foot. So narrower shoes I don't really love those. They kind of cramp my foot up. But a nice wide toe box is good for me. Aiden says, what topics will you discuss or what type of guests? Oh, on the podcast. That's a great question. We're going to leave the podcast fairly open-ended. One of my goals is to bring on athletes that have questions, just like here. Excuse me. But dive a little deeper. So, you guys have asked some amazing questions today. And for the sake of, time and efficiency and recognizing that there's other people in the group, I want to be, as brief as I can with the answer. But with the podcast, my hope is that we'll really dig in a little bit more. And what I think is very common is that if somebody has a question and they need a deeper answer, chances are a lot of people will have the same question or it'll clarify some things for them. So that's thing one on the podcast. Thing two is that I hope to get some experts on there as well. So other coaches, maybe people who are specialists in their space and really dive a little deeper into various topics. So I think the podcast can be awesome. It's going to be a little deeper dive and it'll be really good. Kevin asked, how is technology changing the sport for better or worse? Whew, gosh, one of the biggest technological breakthroughs has been the shoes. And that was really fueled by Nike's attempt to have somebody run under 2 hours. So I don't know if you're following that, but the Nike 2 hour project, they had a guy, Kipchoge. He's from Kenya. I'm pretty sure he's Kenyan. He's the greatest marathon runner of all time. And they had a few guys that they really set up to try and break the 2 hour barrier for the marathon. And of course they did it. It must be a couple of years ago now. And so Nike basically, I think, threw a bunch of money at the nutrition side of it, the pacing side of it. The sub 2 hour marathon is not an official time because they did a lot of things that you're not allowed to actually do in a real race. So they had pacers, they had a pace car. They did it on a closed circuit course. Like I think they maybe even did it on a race car track. They did lots of things that you're not really allowed to do, like in the Boston Marathon, for example. But the goal was exclusively to break 2 hours for the marathon. And so it was like they pulled out all the stops. It was amazing. And one of the big breakthroughs was they put a carbon plate inside the shoe. And now it's mainstream. Every company's had to do it to keep up. And basically what the carbon plate has done to shoes is allow more energy return. They're much faster. It's made a huge difference. It's been huge for the shoe industry because shoes were, I don't want to say they were stagnant, but they hadn't changed much in a long time. And these changed it so much that, like, if you don't have a carbon plated shoe, you're giving up free speed. It's just the way it is. So that's huge. Bike technology has changed a lot. The aerodynamics of bikes has changed a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's always evolving. It's pretty cool. It's a cool sport because there's 3 sports to evolve with. But those are the 2 of the biggest bikes and shoes in the last, 5-10 years has been amazing. For better or worse, well, it depends, how pure you are with all this stuff. Lots of times people, don't like change because they think it's the technology is getting the speed. Certainly with the shoe industry, with the carbon plates, there's an argument for that. But then I'm on the other side of it. I'm like, well, that's kind of sport, if 50 years ago or longer, we played tennis with wooden rackets, and now we play tennis with like carbon fiber rackets and specialized strings and all this stuff. Like every sport evolves in the equipment department. It's kind of the way it goes. So, and then Kevin asked, I've used those carbon inserts, seem to make my calf Achilles issues worse. So what I'm talking about isn't actually an insert. So it's not an insert. It's actually built into the shoe. I don't necessarily want to comment on the calf Achilles issue, but certainly if you didn't have it before and then you use this and now you have it and you didn't really change your run volume at all, then it's a pretty good clue that maybe that's the cause. And so I would defer to a good running shoe store. I would defer to your physio or a medical person that can take a look at that. But certainly, calf Achilles issues are a common thing in running, and they can be from any number of things. Overtraining is usually the big one, but the heel to toe offset of a shoe, so how high the heel is in comparison to how high the toe is. Like some shoes are even, which means the heel has to drop a little further whenever you land, where if the heel's higher, like in a high-heeled shoe, the heel doesn't have to come down as much. And sometimes that's, a little easier for the Achilles. But yeah, look, if you had no problem before and now you have a problem and nothing else changed, pretty good clue that maybe that was the problem. Okay, where are we at? Looks like no one's popping any more questions. Does anybody have any more questions? Definitely ask if you do have some. If that's it, then maybe we can wrap that up. That was a great session. You guys asked some amazing questions. Big thanks to Mike, Aiden, Jason, Kevin. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody there. Really appreciate everybody jumping in today. That was great. Just a reminder. Oh yeah, Kevin asked. Yeah, Jason, thanks. Yeah, you bet. I'm glad that was helpful. Kevin asked, you'll be doing these each week. Yes. So every week we're going to have a question and answer. And as I said, bring your questions. Hopefully we'll give you a decent answer. I will say that if I can't answer the question, I'll look it up and throw it into the chat later at the My Endurance Hub space. But yeah, every week, that's the goal, really to help people figure out some of the stuff that might be on their minds. So just a reminder that we're recording these. And so if you want to go back and look, or you want to send your friends here, if you think some of these questions and answers were good for them as well, you can find them recorded in the question and answer part of the My Endurance Hub replay space. Again, if I think we got to most questions today, but if you do have follow-ups, please put them in the comments and we'll get to them. We're checking that every day. So yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for the comments. I'm really glad that was helpful. And yeah, happy training, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll hopefully see you next week.